My brother just told my son we're not real brothers. What? Sometimes, life throws unexpected lessons your way, lessons you didn't even realize you needed to learn. Today was one of those days. Let me set the stage a little. My son, Ethan, is 7 years old and in that wonderfully inquisitive phase of life where he's constantly learning new things. One of the constants in Ethan's life has been his uncle Mike, who, as you might have guessed, is my brother. Well, sort of, but we'll get to that. Mike has always been a big part of Ethan's world. Ever since Ethan was a baby, Mike has been around, showing up to birthday parties, helping out with school projects, or just coming over to hang out. They have this really tight bond that always warms my heart. When Mike's around, you can see the way Ethan's eyes light up. It's the kind of connection that makes you believe in the power of family. But here's the kicker, Mike and I aren't actually brothers. We didn't grow up together, we don't share the same parents, and we weren't born into the same family. We're what you might call brothers by choice. It's something we've never really had to explain before, until today. It was a pretty typical Sunday afternoon. My wife was out running some errands, and I was working on the grocery list while keeping an ear out for Ethan, who was in the living room playing with his ever-growing collection of toy cars. The sound of the front door opening broke my concentration, and I smiled to myself. Mike had arrived. Uncle Mike. Ethan's excited voice rang out, accompanied by the sound of tiny feet running toward the door. Hey, champ. Mike's deep, cheerful voice echoed back, and I could hear the sound of Ethan practically jumping into his arms. As always, Mike made a grand entrance, and within seconds, they were both laughing and chatting away as if they hadn't just seen each other a few days ago. That's the thing about Mike, he has this energy, this infectious enthusiasm that makes you feel like every moment is an adventure. I walked into the living room, leaned against the doorway, and watched them for a bit. Ethan had already grabbed one of his toy cars, eagerly showing Mike some new track he'd set up. Mike listened intently, asking questions and making suggestions on how to make the setup even cooler. It's moments like these that remind me how lucky Ethan is to have Mike in his life. And then, out of nowhere, Mike dropped a bomb. You know, Ethan, Mike said, in a tone that was casual, too casual for what he was about to say. Your dad and I aren't real brothers. At first, I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. I froze, halfway through jotting down bananas on the grocery list. Did Mike just say what I think he said? Ethan, of course, didn't understand. I mean, why would he? As far as Ethan knew, Mike had always been Uncle Mike, family. He paused, mid-car zoom, and looked up at Mike with wide, curious eyes. What do you mean, Uncle Mike? The room seemed to hold its breath. I found myself standing a little straighter, unsure of what to do or say. Should I step in? Should I stop the conversation? Or should I let Mike explain himself? After all, this wasn't some stranger telling Ethan that we weren't brothers, it was Mike. Mike took a deep breath, clearly realizing he was now in uncharted territory. Well, he began slowly, your dad and I didn't grow up together. We didn't live in the same house, and we don't have the same parents like most brothers do. I could see Ethan's brow furrow as he tried to wrap his head around this new information. His little hands gripped the toy car a bit tighter. But, you call him your brother, Ethan said, his voice soft but steady. Mike smiled, and there was a warmth in his eyes that only someone who truly understands the meaning of family could possess. That's because, in every way that matters, he is my brother. I finally decided to step in. Not to interrupt, but to join the conversation. I walked over and sat down on the floor next to Ethan, putting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Hey, bud. What Uncle Mike is saying is true. We didn't grow up in the same family. We don't have the same mom or dad. But that doesn't mean we're not brothers. Ethan looked up at me, his face full of questions. So, you're not real brothers? I could tell this was going to take some careful explaining. I took a deep breath and glanced at Mike. He nodded, giving me the floor. Well, I began, there are different ways people can be family. Some people are born into the same family, they share the same parents and grow up in the same house. But sometimes, people choose to be family because of the bond they have. That's what happened with Uncle Mike and me. Mike chimed in, your dad and I met when we were older. We became really close friends, but over time, it felt like more than that. We were always there for each other, through the good times and the tough times. And at some point, we realized that we were like brothers. We may not share the same parents, but we share everything that matters. Ethan was quiet for a moment, absorbing it all. So, you're still brothers, just in a different way? I smiled, proud of how quickly he grasped it. Exactly, I said. Family doesn't always have to mean you're related by blood. Family is about love and who's there for you. Uncle Mike and I chose to be brothers because of the bond we have. Ethan seemed satisfied with the explanation, but the conversation stirred up memories for me, memories I hadn't thought about in years. I looked over at Mike, and suddenly, I was back in my early 20s. We had met during a particularly rough time in my life. My parents had just gone through a bitter divorce, and I was struggling to find my footing in the world. Mike had been there through all of it. I remembered one particular night, sitting on the porch of my tiny apartment. I was feeling lost, overwhelmed by everything that was happening in my life. Mike had shown up, unannounced, with a six-pack of beer and a bag of chips. He didn't say much, he didn't have to. He just sat there with me, drinking in silence, letting me know that he was there. That was the night I realized Mike was more than just a friend. He was family. And from that moment on, we were inseparable. We didn't need to share the same DNA to be brothers. We just were. As I sat on the living room floor with Ethan and Mike, I realized how lucky I was to have Mike in my life, and how lucky Ethan was to have him, too. Mike had always been there for me, and now he was here for Ethan, too. After what felt like a lifetime of silence, Ethan finally spoke again. I think it's cool that you guys are brothers, even if you weren't born that way. Mike laughed, ruffling Ethan's hair. Thanks, buddy. I think it's pretty cool, too. I wrapped my arm around Ethan, pulling him close. You know what's even cooler? You get to be part of this family, too. And family is about more than just who you're related to. It's about who loves you, who's there for you, and who you can count on. Ethan beamed, clearly happy with that explanation. So, I get the best of both worlds? I couldn't help but laugh at Ethan's conclusion. Yeah, kiddo, you get the best of both worlds. You've got family you're born into, like me and Mom, and family you choose, like Uncle Mike. It's all part of what makes life special. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, still holding one of his toy cars in his hand. So, I can choose my family too, someday? Mike smiled and looked at me before answering. That's right, Ethan. As you grow up, you'll meet people who become as close as family, even if they're not related to you. And that's a beautiful thing. Family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who show up for you, who stick with you no matter what. This conversation brought back so many memories for me. Mike had always shown up for me. He was there for me during some of the toughest moments of my life. Like the time I lost my job and felt like I had no direction. Mike had been the one to encourage me to go back to school and pursue teaching, something I'd always been passionate about but never thought I'd be good enough for. He believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I remember one night, sitting on the porch of my small apartment, staring out into the night, wondering what the future held for me. Mike had arrived unannounced with a six-pack of beer and a bag of chips. He didn't need to say anything, he just sat next to me, letting me know he was there. That's what family does. It's not always about the grand gestures, sometimes, it's about simply being present when you need someone the most. And that's what Mike had been for me, more than a friend, more than a brother. He was my rock, my family. That's why it didn't matter that we didn't share blood. Our bond was forged through years of trust, support, and love. I looked over at Mike, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. He had played such an important role in my life, and now, he was playing that same role for Ethan. My son was growing up surrounded by love, and that's what mattered most. Ethan broke the silence with another question, his face scrunched in concentration. So, what if I want someone to be part of my family, but they don't want to? Mike chuckled and ruffled Ethan's hair. That's a good question, bud. Sometimes, it doesn't work out that way. Not everyone will want to be part of your life in the same way you want them to be. But that's okay. The people who matter, the ones who really care about you, will be there. And you'll know who they are, trust me. Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer, nodding and going back to pushing his toy cars along the floor. Mike and I exchanged another glance, this one filled with the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. After Mike left that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. It had started as a simple misunderstanding, but it had turned into something so much more, a reminder of the importance of chosen family and the love that binds us all together. Later that night, after putting Ethan to bed, I found myself sitting on the porch, much like I had all those years ago when I was at a crossroads in my life. Only this time, things were different. I wasn't lost anymore. I had a family, a purpose, and a deep sense of fulfillment. And a lot of that was thanks to Mike. I thought back to all the times Mike had been there for me, the countless late-night phone calls, the road trips when we needed to clear our heads, the advice he'd given me when I felt overwhelmed as a new dad. Mike had been a constant in my life, and I realized that's what true family is. It's not always about who you're born with or who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Who stands by your side, even when things get tough. Who celebrates your victories and lifts you up during your failures. That's what Mike had done for me, and now he was doing the same for Ethan. I smiled to myself, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. I knew that Ethan would grow up understanding that family is about more than just blood. He'd learn that family can be the people you choose to love, the people who make your life richer and fuller. And I had Mike to thank for teaching us both that lesson. Over the next few weeks, Ethan didn't bring up the conversation again, but I could tell he was still thinking about it. He'd occasionally ask me questions about family and relationships, and I could see that the idea of chosen family had stuck with him. One evening, as we were sitting down for dinner, Ethan looked up at me and said, "Dad, I think I understand now. Uncle Mike is your brother because you chose him to be. And I'm glad you did." I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at my son. "Me too, buddy. Me too." In that moment, I realized that the conversation with Mike had been more than just an explanation. It had been a defining moment in Ethan's understanding of what it means to love and be loved. He was growing up surrounded by people who cared about him, and he was learning that family is something you create with the people who matter most. As the years went by, I watched Ethan grow closer to Mike. Their bond only deepened, and I knew that Ethan would carry these lessons with him throughout his life. He'd know that no matter where life took him, he'd always have people who loved him and had his back. He'd understand that family isn't just something you're born into, it's something you build with the people who care about you. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Grateful for Mike, for the love we've shared, and for the family we've created together. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how we came into each other's lives. What matters is that we're here, we're together, and we're family. Looking back on that day, I realized it was a pivotal moment not just for Ethan, but for me too. It reminded me that family is fluid, evolving, and sometimes complicated. But at its core, it's about the people you choose to love and who choose to love you back. So, yeah, maybe Mike and I aren't real brothers in the traditional sense. But in every way that matters, we're brothers. And as I watch Ethan grow up with both blood and chosen family by his side, I know he'll carry that same understanding with him into the world. Family is what you make it. And in the end, that's all that really matters. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed these Reddit stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.